In May of 2016, I published a video showcasing my journey restoring a Street Fighter II cabinet into a MAME emulation machine. While the responses to this video were ultimately positive, there were quite a few people that were disappointed in my restoration job, or lack thereof. I've always wanted to go back to this project and improve it with a better mindset and higher budget. However, a variety of reasons have stopped me from doing so, mostly the fact that it hasn't even been in my house. So when the time was right, the money was right, and I had the opportunity to get it back to my place, I decided to restore the Street Fighter II Championship Edition arcade machine. First things first, a bit of backstory for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. When I was a bored college freshman in a boring lecture, I did what any bored college freshman would do. I went on Craigslist and started looking at random things. I eventually found a page that was dedicated to reselling professionally restored arcade machines, and I really wanted one, but the prices on these things, man, they were expensive. So I had the genius idea that instead of getting a professionally restored arcade machine, I would find a hallowed shell or broken unit and fix it myself. That's when I stumbled across this Street Fighter II Championship Edition arcade machine that really caught my interest, mostly because I really like Street Fighter. I'm by no means a professional Street Fighter player, but I do enjoy some rounds from time to time. I get my ass stomped on the internet, but I do enjoy playing it. My main is Cammy, which is why I decided that if I ever got a Street Fighter machine, I would name it after her. Anyways, this machine was located in the other side of the state I live in, and mind you, Connecticut is not the largest state in the United States, but it was still a bit of a haul, and the only car I had was a 1998 Subaru hatchback, so I wouldn't be crazy enough to drive all the way out there, load the arcade machine into my car, and then attempt to drive it all the way back home, would I? I was looking at arcade machines during class. Do you really think I'm smart? Now I know what you're thinking. Danny, why didn't you just buy an arcade 1-up Street Fighter machine? They're a much smaller scale and you wouldn't have had to go to the other side of the state to pick it up. And the simple answer to that is that they didn't exist yet. But the more complex answer is, look, these things are really cool, and if you're tight on space and low on a budget, I would definitely recommend picking one up. But this doesn't compare to this. Not only is modding an empty cabinet infinitely easier than having to rip all of the electronics out of an arcade 1-up machine, but it also gives you a lot more space because it's a lot bigger, meaning that both player 1 and player 2 won't be as cramped on the controls. Anyways, after my buddy Chris and I unloaded this 400-pound beast from my tiny-ass Subaru and brought it inside, I began immediately cleaning it up. There was a lot left over and tons of evidence to suggest that this arcade machine has had very many forms. Most notably, I found tons of documentation and little graphics for Street Fighter 3 Second Impact, which I've never even played before. Also at the very bottom of the arcade machine was a crudely laminated graphic for Super Puzzle Fighter 2, which has led me to believe that this very cabinet was reused by Capcom 3 separate times, which is honestly kind of awesome. I had no idea video game companies would reuse arcade cabinets, but it makes a lot of sense. Why would you go through the effort of manufacturing a whole new one when you can just rebrand one of your current cabinets that's dwelling in popularity, like Street Fighter 2 was towards the late 90s? That's kinda cool. After some painting, initial setup with a laptop, and eventual placement of a television, I decided that this was pretty much close enough to a final product at the time. My budget was sort of drying up. And yeah, looking back on it, it wasn't really pretty. It didn't even have a proper marquee at the top, and I didn't even attempt to make a bezel for it to hide the silver edges, which was just ugly. In my mind, this has always been a continual work in progress, something like a project car that I can continuously work on in my free time until eventually, years down the line, it's complete. Unfortunately, when I had to move and store the arcade machine at my sister's house, that sort of put a wrench in my plans. But like I said in the beginning of the video, the time and the money are both right for me to work on Cammy some more. The first thing that needed to be taken care of was that god-awful TV. That thing needed to go. I really wanted to put a PVM or a CRT inside of it, but I just could not find one. These things are getting increasingly rare around me. So I decided to stick with a big Dell 4x3 monitor instead. It can handle some nice resolutions and it's got a decent refresh rate, so games should look pretty on this thing. Next, a bezel. This thing's desperately needed one since day one, so I decided to run to Staples and get some project foam. I went with black because I didn't feel like painting anything. I measured out the monitor and cut the project foam to shape, and yeah, you can kind of tell that I've never really done this before. It doesn't look pretty, but it's pretty much going to be submerged in darkness all the time, and just like your mother, this arcade machine's going to look a lot better at night. Next up, the coin door. I originally had this setup where you can just press player 1 or player 2 insert coin buttons down below, but it looks stupid. and there's no telling me it doesn't look stupid. I've always hated the look of this. I've always wanted to make the buttons into those little retrieve coin buttons, but I figured if I'm going that far, I might as well put an actual coin mech in it. So this awesome company called X Arcade shipped me this one mechanism coin door, which is basically all I need. Technically, the original cabinet had two, but that's just one more thing to go wrong in the future, so I'm fine with just the one. I did have to modify the inside of the arcade machine just a little bit. Surely enough, I was able to get the coin door to fit perfectly and function as normal. The software also needed to be overhauled a tiny bit, but thankfully all that was basically swapping out that old ass laptop with a Raspberry Pi running RetroPie. I've already had experience with RetroPie in the past, so this was pretty much no problem at all. And at last, we have something that resembles a final product far better than the previous one. This is starting to look a little snazzy. There are still some things I want to do to it, like add some decals and replace these joysticks with much better ones. And I also want to replace these crudely printed out Capcom decals with much higher quality ones. Maybe I'll order some off Etsy or print out some of my own on actual sticker paper instead of just taping them directly to the bezel. But those are more so just small fry things that I can do in one of my days off. The actual overhaul itself is complete, and I'm very, very happy with how it's turned out.